Barbara Mullenix. There are crimes that, at first glance, are difficult to evaluate without ambiguity. On one side, the law of every nation guarantees the sanctity of life and health for all individuals. Conversely, it is often contradicted by witness statements that downplay the offender's culpability. One such contentious incident was the crime that transpired within the Mullenix family. Let us attempt to understand it together. Let us uncover the sources of the tension and assess the responsibility of each participant. Could it be that the victim was not entirely innocent? Or perhaps her killer was merely hiding behind a mask of virtue? An unexpected revelation awaited. On September 14, 2006, unrest struck Newport Beach. A woman's body had been found floating in a body of water. The corpse appeared to have been wrapped in a sheet and then placed inside a box. Once it was exposed to the water, the fragile covering disintegrated, revealing what was intended to remain unseen. The body rose to the surface after being submerged for less than a day. Normally, warm water accelerates the decomposition process. Consequently, the appearance of the deceased left much to be desired. A forensic medical examination determined that the cause of death was multiple stab wounds. Altogether, she had sustained approximately 52 strikes, one of which pierced directly through her eye. Experts concluded that 3 separate knives had been used, implying that at least 2 individuals had attacked the victim. Naturally, there were no identification documents on her person, compelling the police to exert significant effort to ascertain who she was. Among the list of missing persons, the woman's description was absent, and no new disappearances had been reported at that time. Everything suggested an attempt to conceal the committed crime. Experts also established that the woman had undergone cosmetic surgery during her lifetime, specifically breast augmentation. Since body identification through implant serial numbers had become a standard procedure, the murdered woman's identity was soon confirmed. She turned out to be 56-year-old Barbara Mullenix. Who was Barbara Mullenix? The future Mrs. Mullenix had been born on May 29, 1950, in Munich, Germany. In her youth, she was exceptionally attractive and sociable. Hence, she was always the center of attention. Yet, those same traits not only brought her admiration from men, but also caused her considerable distress. At the age of 18, she became a victim of violence. The young woman wished to erase the incident from her memory as quickly as possible. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. However, sometime later, she discovered she was pregnant. Barbara chose not to have an abortion. Instead, she decided to carry the baby to term and give it to a kind family. Eventually, she got married. During that marriage, she gave birth to a son, Alex Hagwood. Nonetheless, her relationship with her first husband did not endure for long. At the age of 35, Barbara's interest was drawn to Bruce Mullenix. The man later recalled that she was an extraordinary woman who immediately captivated him. She was known for her candor and self-assurance. In November 1987, the couple got married. Mr. Mullenix was 9 years younger than his wife, but the age gap was hardly noticeable. Barbara knew how to attract attention and enjoyed having fun. After relocating to Oklahoma City, the family welcomed a daughter named Rachel. Everything was good in the beginning, but as time passed, problems started to arise. In the evenings, Bruce would sometimes go out for a beer, and on weekends, he would visit friends. At first, Barbara joined him socially, but later she developed an addiction to alcohol. Evidently, the traumatic events from her youth had left a lasting mark. Under the influence of alcohol, the woman's behavior became erratic. However, despite the strained relationship between the parents, they both deeply loved their daughter. They spoiled her and tried to satisfy her every desire. While living in Oklahoma before the divorce, Rachel had a spacious room, while her parents shared a small one. The family always celebrated the girls' birthdays at home. Miss Mullenix recalled that she had been very close to her mother, perhaps even more so than most mothers and daughters. But this close relationship only existed when her mother was sober. The rest of the time, Rachel avoided her and made no effort to communicate. "Our relationship was generally good," she said, "but when Barbara drank, she became angry and unhinged. She was the first to start fights." Bruce confirmed his daughter's words. Since the Mullenix home was located near Hollywood, Barbara was absolutely thrilled. She adored movies and particularly favored Gone with the Wind. Shortly after the move, she managed to find work as a film extra. It was as though her Hollywood dream had finally come true. She believed that, in time, she would be offered a more serious acting role. For the moment, she and her daughter actively participated as background actors in films and television shows. The scene of the crime was determined. But who was responsible? Investigators were puzzled as to why none of the relatives had reported the woman missing. Soon, Detectives Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright secured a search warrant for Barbara's residence. They speculated that since the woman's body had been wrapped in a sheet, the murder might have occurred in her bed. Thus, the search for evidence began at Mrs. Mullenix's home. The police found no one present at the residence. At first glance, everything appeared normal. There were no visible indications of foul play. However, on the second floor, a disassembled bed drew attention. It had no mattress. Within just a few hours, the crime scene began to take shape. The detectives' suspicions proved well-founded. Forensic specialists discovered blood traces on the walls. Someone had gone to great lengths to remove all signs of the crime. The blood-soaked mattress had evidently been destroyed. There was no longer any doubt that the murder had occurred there. The police also concluded that the homeowner must have known the perpetrator. Therefore, the first person to fall under suspicion was Mr. Mullenix. It seemed a peculiar coincidence that he had been out of town at the time. Furthermore, just one day after the discovery of the body, Bruce returned home. He explained that he had grown concerned because neither his wife nor his daughter had been answering his calls. The man, of course, had a sense that something was wrong, but he could never have imagined such a horrific outcome. Nevertheless, upon hearing of Barbara's brutal death, the former husband reacted with unexpected calm. This reaction also raised suspicions among the detectives, prompting them to look deeper into the reasons for his trip. Bruce stated that he had been away on a business trip. His employer confirmed this information, thus verifying his alibi. The investigation, as a result, was once again at an impasse. Daughter's love. When Rachel turned 17, she met Ian Allen. The young man was 4 years older than she was. The two fell passionately in love. Ian supported Rachel in every possible way and even helped her with household chores. Initially, Barbara approved of him. They even spent time together, going on walks and outings. In order for the young couple to meet freely, Rachel's parents obtained a special permit, as apparently required by the law and local authorities. Law enforcement officers often took notice of the unconventional pair. The girl was permitted to stay out until 1 o'clock in the morning, but she frequently broke the curfew and was repeatedly placed under house arrest as punishment. After a while, Mrs. Mullenix began to notice that her daughter's emotions were developing into something far more serious. To make matters worse, the two soon announced their decision to get engaged. The move seemed far too hasty to Barbara. Ian and Rachel had known each other for only 3 months. Barbara did not want to lose her daughter or the financial support she continued to receive from her ex-husband. She decided to tighten her control and assert greater authority. Rachel found herself caught between two opposing sides. She did not wish to upset her mother, whose dominance was becoming increasingly overbearing. Ian, on the other hand, refused to back down. Thus, her mother and Ian began to compete for Rachel's affection. With every quarrel and confrontation that arose between them, Rachel's fragile mental state suffered more and more. By the end of the summer of 2006, the relationship between Ian and Barbara had completely deteriorated. The younger Alan feared that Rachel's mother might persuade her to end the relationship or forbid her from seeing him altogether. One night, after Rachel once again broke her curfew, Barbara lost her temper. Despite the late hour, Mrs. Mullenix drove to Ian's home and caused a scene. The incident deeply offended and angered Ian. It became evident to everyone that the situation could no longer continue as it was. On the trail of the fugitives, Bruce was no longer suspected of murdering his ex-wife. Detectives shifted their focus to Rachel and Ian. Police learned that Barbara had been feeling increasingly lonely and drinking excessively. Her behavior had become unstable. Her daughter's attention was slipping further away from her. She regarded Ian as an unworthy partner and saw Rachel as a traitor. That was why Mrs. Mullenix often argued with them. Moreover, no one knew the whereabouts of the young couple. They had not made contact with anyone. Considering the strained relationship between Barbara and Ian, the girl's father assumed that Ian was the perpetrator whom the police were seeking. Rachel, in all likelihood, was not safe either. Otherwise, she would have contacted someone, Mr. Mullenix reasoned. The police began a search for the missing pair. The Allen residence was also inspected. When detectives examined Ian's computer, they discovered some intriguing internet searches. The young man had been researching routes leading to the city of Tampa, located in Florida. Bruce recalled that before living with him, Barbara and Rachel had resided there. The couple was officially declared missing. Police stations across the country received bulletins describing the physical appearance of the two young people. Furthermore, the suspect had not disappeared without leaving a trace. Ian Allen's credit card had been used for a purchase at a gas station in Louisiana. A surveillance camera at that location had also captured his truck. Mr. Mullenix's fears were confirmed. Rachel was indeed traveling with him. All that remained was to intercept them. Detectives Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright contacted their colleagues in the next town along the couple's route. Local police closed off highways in search of the van. Before long, Ian Allen and Rachel Mullenix were apprehended. The kidnapping story. "Do you know that I've been kidnapped?" Rachel shouted upon her arrest. "What right do you have to arrest me, to throw me on the ground and handcuff me?" she continued. "I'm not a criminal for you to treat me this way." Detectives Joe and Steve waited patiently for the opportunity to question the couple. 2 days later, they arrived at a police station in Louisiana. Miss Mullenix insisted that she had not killed her mother. When investigators pressed her further, she shifted the blame onto her boyfriend. Rachel claimed that Ian had murdered her mother and then forced her to flee with him. The police requested that she recount what had happened on September 13, 2006. "I woke up to strange noises in the house. Then I realized my mother was screaming and calling for help. I ran to her room. What I saw horrified me. Ian was attacking my mom with a knife. He kept stabbing her again and again. I jumped on him and tried to pull him away, but he was very strong and easily pushed me back. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. I was in a sort of daze," Rachel began her account. Afterward, she added that her boyfriend had forced her to help erase the evidence. He also made her pack her mother's belongings into bags. Rachel claimed that Ian's intention was to make it appear as though Barbara had suddenly left home. Initially, the detectives wanted to believe the girl. The trauma she had endured could have driven anyone into a state of shock. Yet, for some reason, the witness to the murder seemed excessively defensive and repeatedly insisted that she had played no role in the crime. Moreover, there were no signs of struggle or injuries on Rachel's body. When police later questioned Ian Allen, they uncovered an interesting detail. He told them that his girlfriend often spoke about how difficult life with her mother was, describing how aggressive and volatile Barbara became when she drank. Instead of reconciling the two rivals, Rachel only deepened Ian's negative emotions. Certainly, some of the things she said were true, but others were clearly exaggerated. That was why Ian eventually became convinced that Barbara would never let them live in peace. Sometime after the late-night quarrel at the Allen residence, still harboring resentment toward Barbara, the young man went to the Mullenix house. Rachel was under house arrest at the time. "I wanted to see her. I knew Barbara wouldn't let me in to visit her, so I came secretly. I tried to sneak quietly into her room, but Barbara noticed me. We started arguing, and it escalated into threats. With the folding knife I always carry, I only meant to scare her. But when I held the blade to Mrs. Mullenix's throat, she began screaming. That made me furious and triggered the attack. Things got out of control. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. Rachel really had nothing to do with it," Ian said about the incident. To the investigators' surprise, the young man did not attempt to evade responsibility and confessed to everything. Over time, however, detectives became increasingly convinced that Rachel Mullenix was directly involved in the murder. It was clear that her boyfriend was protecting her. Surveillance footage from the gas station convenience store where the couple had stopped was carefully examined. Rachel could be seen walking around the store looking for groceries. At that moment, she could easily have called for help or escaped. Yet, for some reason, she did not. Moreover, as it was later revealed, the girl had the opportunity to call her father, but instead chose to contact a friend. It was discovered that just a few hours after the murder, Miss Mullenix sent Ian Allen a message that read, "I love you," and that was how Rachel finally lost the investigators' trust. Rachel's defense. It took 2 years to collect and analyze all the evidence in the Barbara Mullenix murder case. During that period, Rachel turned 19 years old. For any other young woman, that is a wonderful age. The whole life still lies ahead. But for the young Mullenix, her future depended entirely on the jury's verdict, and she did everything possible to convince everyone of her innocence. When Rachel spoke about her childhood, her face brightened. It was evident that her early years had been happy. Undoubtedly, Barbara and Bruce had tried to ensure that despite various hardships. Recalling her relationship with her mother, Rachel stated that it had generally been good, marred only by her mother's excessive drinking and later by her controlling behavior after Ian appeared in her life. At school, I was known as the girl from a not very prosperous family with alcoholic parents. When my father drank, he was still himself, kind and caring. The same can't be said about my mom, she told the court, describing the atmosphere at home. Her testimony was confirmed by her friend Kelsey Douglas, who often visited the Mullenix family. Kelsey said that Rachel always tried to please her mother in every way, but eventually reached a point where she could no longer endure the harsh control and insults. She admitted to me that she had started drinking from time to time. Rachel didn't know what else to do. She had nowhere to turn. Alcohol helped her ease the tension and forget the family troubles for a while, Ms. Douglas reported. Alex, Rachel's older brother, strangely enough, also stood up for Rachel. He considered her a victim rather than a murderer. That's why he refused to believe in her guilt to the last. He told the court that his sister had been a good and obedient child. She did well at school, practiced sports and ballet. As for the relationship between Barbara, Rachel, and Ian, Alex noted that at first they were great. All three spent a lot of time together. Barbara's eldest son also reported that their mother abused alcohol and illegal substances before her death. She took stimulants and tranquilizers and often threw loud parties. When Barbara realized that Rachel and her boyfriend wanted to distance themselves, she couldn't accept it. In addition, she found it difficult to get by on her own without alimony and maintenance money. All of this became a source of irritation. According to Alex, Mrs. Mullenix was a very controlling woman. She wanted to be in control of everything. With Rachel, she certainly went overboard in this. My mother loved to be the center of attention. With Ian coming into Rachel's life, her position shifted to the side. Alex summarized. In the involvement of his daughter in the murder of Barbara, could not believe, and the girl's father. He believed that she loved her mother very much and was incapable of hurting her. In all the time, Rachel did not accuse her mother of the weaknesses that were peculiar to her. She simply reported them as a fact. The girl repeatedly stated that she felt sorry for. Barbara had a difficult life. About the relationship of her parents, Miss Mullenix recalled with bitterness. Rachel said that the slightest details in the behavior of his father drove his mother into a rage. Barbara often snapped at him, considered a spender. Rachel also told the court that she regretted her love for the young man. She made a big mistake when she started dating him. Their feelings brought discord to her relationship with her mother. Ian felt that my mom was a threat to him. He also wanted to control me like she did. My boyfriend wasn't ideal either, often hurt, and treated me like I was his property. I was torn between the two. Every time there was an argument with my mom, I shared about it. It made it easier for me to get over what happened, Rachel recalled. She concluded by adding that Ian did everything he could to prevent harm to what he thought was his, prosecution's position. Sonia blessed. The prosecutor involved in the case did not believe Rachel's story. She claimed that the girl's angelic appearance was deceptive because she thought she was already smart enough for her age. Therefore, the position Miss Mullenix had chosen was thoroughly refuted. The officers who investigated supported the prosecutor in this. Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright believed that Rachel had some mental health issues. According to them, she was the meanest girl they had ever spoken to. During the interview, the prosecutor competently appealed the inconsistencies in Miss Mullenix's testimony. She was asked why she had never once called for help when she had the opportunity to do so, to which Rachel replied that she had been confused and did not know how to act in such a situation. The defendant also added that she had been frightened by Ian's unpredictable behavior. The prosecutor pointed out that Rachel had more than one opportunity to escape. Her actions were uncharacteristic of a kidnapping victim. The prosecution believed that Miss Mullenix had not only taken part in the attack on her mother, but had actually planned the crime in advance. When questioned about the details of Ian's stabbing, Rachel was unable to give consistent answers. Her statements changed repeatedly and often contradicted one another. During the trial, the defendant claimed that she had not been present during the confrontation between Barbara and Ian. She alleged that she had simply left them alone in her room, hoping they would calm down. Only afterward did she hear screams and sounds of a struggle, prompting her to run back. where she saw Ian attacking her mother with a knife. However, Rachel's version did not match the physical evidence found at the crime scene. The forensic report clearly indicated that Barbara's assailant had not acted alone. Experts concluded that only 5 minutes had been required to kill the victim. Rachel continued to insist on her innocence. Questions such as why she failed to call emergency services, or why she sent a love message to her mother's killer, hung unanswered in the air. The forensic psychiatrist who examined Miss Mullenix diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder. He believed that she truly loved her mother, yet hated her just as deeply. People with such personality traits, he noted, tend to exhibit unstable behavior that is often destructive both to themselves and to others. Bitter verdict. It took the jury 3 days to reach a final decision. Ian Allen was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. For Rachel Mullenix, the court's decision offered no solace either. She was found complicit in her mother's death, and her actions were also classified as first-degree murder. The young woman received a life sentence, with her first chance at parole coming when she turns approximately 41 years old. After the verdict was delivered, the prosecutor expressed a sense of relief. "There is no doubt that Ian Allen and Rachel Mullenix killed Barbara," stated Sonia Baylist. For a mother, such a death was the ultimate betrayal. The day Barbara gave birth to her daughter, she unknowingly signed her own death warrant. The child she loved so deeply became both her light and her darkness. Undoubtedly, Mrs. Mullenix had made many mistakes in her life. She was far from a perfect mother, yet she never abandoned her children to misfortune. Barbara's jealousy and fear of loneliness had only hardened her already strong character. But people in love always have a choice. They could have simply walked away to preserve their right to love freely. In time, tempers might have cooled, relationships could have healed. Perhaps Barbara would have shifted her focus elsewhere, and the grandchildren Rachel and Ian might one day have given her could have become her greatest joy. Moving on to the next case. Herman Brown. Now let us move on to Cincinnati, an Ohio city known for its flourishing arts scene. Within the Cincinnati metropolitan region, the city functions as both an economic and cultural center. It is the largest metropolitan area in Ohio and ranks as the 31st largest in the United States, boasting an estimated population of 2.2 million. On February 15, 2003, Cincinnati police arrived at the 2500 block of Sarvis Court in Cincinnati to perform a wellness check. This was prompted by a 911 call reporting a strong and disturbing odor coming from the apartment. Upon entering, authorities discovered the body of a man named Herman Brown. He was naked and lifeless on the floor, with an extension cord wrapped tightly around his neck and several stab wounds. The crime scene was deeply disturbing and gruesome, as investigators also found blood traces in the bathroom sink. There is limited information available about the deceased man, and it is believed that police may have withheld details to safeguard his privacy. At the crime scene, detectives gathered various pieces of evidence scattered throughout the apartment, including blood from the bathroom sink, cigarette butts, and a swab from the victim. When this evidence was analyzed, 2 DNA profiles emerged. One belonged to Brown, while the other matched an unknown individual. Investigators attempted to trace the unidentified DNA, but were unable to find a match. As a result, the homicide case was closed, allowing Brown's brutal killer to remain free. It remained unresolved until 2023, when a groundbreaking development occurred. The breakthrough in the case came through the use of genetic genealogy testing. To identify potential suspects absent from conventional law enforcement databases, the DNA profile obtained from the cigarette butts was reanalyzed and entered into a forensic genetic genealogy search. This cutting-edge approach generated a match, linking the DNA to Robert Stewart, a 64-year-old man. To confirm this connection, detectives conducted further DNA testing, ultimately verifying that Stewart's DNA was present on the cigarette butts from the critical night of Brown's murder. On September 15, 2023, Stewart was ultimately arrested in Lima, Ohio, and later extradited to Hamilton County. He is currently being held at the Justice Center on a $500,000 bond. If convicted of the 2 counts of murder and 1 count of felonious assault filed against him, he could face a life sentence. Melissa Powers, the Hamilton County prosecutor, commended the Cincinnati Police Homicide Unit. She emphasized the detectives' tireless commitment to their investigations and the victims they served, applauding their unwavering dedication. She stressed that regardless of how long it takes to resolve a case, their pursuit of justice remains steadfast. Powers also expressed her gratitude for providing Brown's family and friends with a sense of closure, stating that Robert Stewart's long-awaited arrest had delivered long-overdue justice and resolution to this heartbreaking case. Moving on to the next case. Martha Murray Morrison. Vancouver is a city in Clark County, Washington, located on the north bank of the Columbia River. It is well known for its beautiful scenery. Vancouver is sometimes nicknamed the Hollywood of the North, as most of its neighborhoods experience very little violent crime. Although many consider Vancouver a safe place to live, some dangers still exist. This leads us back to a horrific event that took place in 1974. Born in Eugene, Oregon, around 1956, Martha Murray Morrison grew up with her sister Reba. Despite their mother's deafness, the two sisters maintained a close relationship, and Martha spent countless hours learning sign language so she could assist her mother throughout much of her childhood. While living in Lane County, Oregon, Martha spent some time in foster care. She attended Corvallis Farm School in Corvallis and Roosevelt High School in Portland. Martha had a history of drug use, substance abuse, and repeatedly running away from both the Corvallis Farm School and her foster and biological homes. By 1974, Martha was a lovely 17-year-old with long brown hair and hazel eyes. She traveled to Arizona to participate in a work program, where she met a boy who was also enrolled. The two later moved to Portland together. By mid-1974, the young man, who worked as a welder at the shipyards, was believed to be Martha's boyfriend. Although the couple did not argue often, on September 1, 1974, Martha stormed out of their apartment carrying a suitcase after an argument, having decided to leave him. Tragically, that was the last time her boyfriend ever saw her alive. Martha never returned home. The following month, reports emerged of a strong odor coming from Dole Valley, a densely wooded area in eastern Clark County, Vancouver. On October 12, 1974, a search team was organized to investigate, and while in the valley, they discovered the remains of two women lying side by side. The bodies had been left exposed to the elements, and wildlife activity made it nearly impossible to determine the exact cause of death. Nonetheless, authorities were called to the scene. Despite the condition of the remains, police were convinced that both women had been murdered and had enough evidence to classify the case as a homicide. After her husband reported her missing on August 4th of that same year, dental records soon confirmed that the first body belonged to 18-year-old Carol Platt Valenzuela. Carol had last been seen hitchhiking in Vancouver, Washington, on August 2, 1974, and when she failed to return home that night as planned, her husband grew worried. Over the next several days, he searched for her but was unable to locate her and ultimately reported her missing to authorities. Following the discovery and additional questioning, Carol's husband was released on October 25, 1974, after successfully passing a polygraph test. Carol had left behind twin babies who were only 10 months old when she disappeared. All investigative efforts failed to uncover any information about the identity of the second body. The unknown woman's age was initially estimated to be between 20 and 25 years old. An anthropologist from the University of Washington was assigned to examine the remains. Because of animal interference and natural decomposition, it was difficult to determine the exact time or cause of death, but analysis indicated that the victims had been dead for at least 2 weeks before their bodies were found. It was believed that the women may not have been killed at the same location where their remains were discovered, and they might have been murdered at different times. Tragically, the public did not recognize the forensic facial reconstructions of the unidentified victim, which were created from both frontal and profile perspectives and published in newspapers. Detectives even released physical details about the woman, noting her curly-textured hair and poor dental hygiene. A comprehensive investigation was launched to identify both the killer and the second woman whose remains were found at the scene. However, the detectives' efforts were unsuccessful, as no clues or evidence recovered at the site could point directly to the murderer. Although known serial killers such as Ted Bundy and Randall Woodfield were considered possible suspects in the women's deaths, no solid evidence ever linked them to the case. DNA samples from each woman were collected and preserved in hopes that they might one day help solve the mystery. Despite the best efforts of forensic specialists and law enforcement, the identity of the second woman remained unknown for many years. With no new developments over time, the case eventually faded and was placed on hold. In 2007, Nikki Costa, operations manager at the Clark County Medical Examiner's Office, discovered that the unidentified remains from the 1974 case had been mislabeled. Some bone fragments belonging to the unidentified woman were marked with the name Carol Platt Valenzuela, the woman whose body had been found beside her. Though considered a clerical mistake, this labeling error led investigators to spend decades pursuing false leads, wasting significant time and effort. The case of Martha Morrison, who had vanished from her Portland apartment on September 1, 1974, was reopened by her sister Reba Morrison and her half-brother in 2010. Recalling that her family had filed a missing person report for Martha, Reba felt disheartened when she reviewed it again. She discovered that no official report had ever been filed regarding Martha's disappearance, and there was no record indicating that such a report had been made in 1974. The unidentified woman's remains were sent to Bobby Cellmark Forensics in Lawton, Virginia, in 2012 for DNA examination. Eventually, a DNA profile was successfully developed and uploaded to the National DNA Database. In 2013, detectives contacted Reba to ask whether the unidentified remains could possibly belong to Martha Morrison, her sister who had been missing for decades. After DNA samples were successfully collected from Reba and her half-brother, the researchers confidently forwarded them to the University of North Texas in hopes of obtaining more detailed results. A genetic profile was then created by comparing the collected samples with potential matches. Although certain similarities were noted between the samples and the unidentified remains, a conclusive match could not yet be established. Ultimately, both Martha and the unidentified victim were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database, which is devoted to locating missing individuals and identifying human remains. To perform a more precise DNA comparison, the Clark County Medical Examiner's Office required additional samples from other relatives of Reba's family. They therefore requested a DNA sample from Martha's mother and conducted further testing. The results again showed DNA consistency, but were inconclusive in confirming the woman's identity. After the earlier testing proved unsuccessful, forensic experts sought to obtain DNA from another family member, Martha's father. Since he had already passed away, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children agreed to finance the exhumation of his remains so that DNA could be extracted and compared with the unidentified remains. The final test results in 2015 confirmed that the remains indeed belonged to Martha Morrison. Since then, the Washington State Police have been re-examining evidence from cases involving suspected serial killers to determine whether any could be linked to the murders of Martha and Carol. While analyzing the evidence, detectives uncovered a DNA sample taken from the grip of an air pistol belonging to a serial killer. When this DNA sample proved to be a perfect match to Martha Morrison's, investigators made a major breakthrough. A forensic scientist from the Washington State Patrol Lab in Vancouver testified that there was a 1 in 30 billion probability that the partial DNA profile obtained from the weapon and Martha's remains matched. The serial killer whose gun contained Martha's DNA was identified as Warren Leslie Forrest Warren was already serving a life sentence in 2017 for the July 11, 1974 murder of 20-year-old Krista Blake, who had last been seen entering his blue Ford Econoline cargo van near downtown Vancouver. On October 2, 1974, Warren was arrested for Krista's murder, which occurred only 10 days before the bodies of Martha and Carol were discovered in Dole Valley. In an attempt to collect further evidence to strengthen their case against him, investigators continued to examine Warren's past. When confronted about the accusations, Warren denied killing Martha and Carol. However, after a forensic scientist from the Vancouver and Washington State Patrol Lab testified that the partial DNA profile she developed from the weapon matched the partial DNA profile obtained from Martha's remains, Warren was charged with Martha Morrison's murder. Prosecutors relied on this newly uncovered evidence to bring a fresh murder charge against Warren in 2019, even though he was already serving a life sentence for previous crimes. In January 2023, Warren's trial began, during which more than 30 witnesses testified against him. Among those present in court were relatives of 16-year-old Jamie Grissom and 14-year-old Diane Gilchrist, along with families of 6 other women and girls whom Warren was also suspected of killing. To establish that Warren, now 74 years old, had exhibited a consistent pattern of abducting, assaulting, and murdering women during the early 1970s. The prosecution called survivor Norma Jean-Louis to testify. In the same year that Martha disappeared, Norma Jean-Louis, another of Warren's victims, was only 15 years old when she managed to escape his abduction and assault. After Warren had tied Norma to a tree and left her for dead in 1974, she managed to crawl to a nearby road and seek help. During Warren's 2023 trial, Norma testified that after finishing her shift at the Oregon Environmental Council and heading to her next volunteer job, Warren had approached her, asking if she was interested in modeling work. Persuaded by his convincing demeanor, Norma agreed to accompany him and entered his blue van. Afterward, he allegedly drove her to Washington Park in Portland, where he attacked her with a knife and attempted to strangle her. According to Norma's court testimony, Warren forced her out of the vehicle with a noose around her neck, bound her in his trunk, shot her several times with an air pistol, the same weapon used as evidence in Martha's case, strangled her until she lost consciousness, covered her body with logs, and abandoned her to die. Warren was never charged for the crimes he committed against Norma. She stated that her only purpose in testifying was to provide answers to the families who still lacked closure regarding the fate of their loved ones. Many of the parents of the young women Warren murdered passed away without ever learning what had happened to their daughters. Norma, the only survivor among Warren's victims, stated that she understood what those girls' final moments must have been like, and that her only wish was for Warren to face justice for the murders and bring some closure to the families of his victims. Warren's defense attorney, C. N. Downs, argued that there was no concrete evidence establishing how or when Martha had died. He also emphasized that no one had ever documented the exact date of her disappearance. Downs asserted that all of the allegations against Warren concerning Martha were entirely speculative and that Warren and Martha had been complete strangers. He further argued that there were several differences between Warren's previous assaults and Martha's case. The area where the remains of Warren's other victim, Norma, had been found and the site where Martha's remains were located were not the same. The location of Martha's crime scene had no connection to the parks in Clark County, where Warren had previously been employed in one of the departments. During her closing statements, Clark County prosecutor Lauren Boyd argued that Warren's intent to kill Martha had been proven beyond reasonable doubt through DNA evidence and his documented pattern of kidnapping, assaulting, and abandoning young women in rural Clark County in 1974. Lauren testified in court that the presence of Martha's blood on Warren's air pistol could not have been accidental. She added that there was no other possible explanation, asserting that Warren's murder of Martha was the only reason her blood ended up on the weapon. On February 1, 2023, a Southwest Washington jury found suspected serial killer Warren Leslie Forrest guilty of first-degree murder in connection with the cold case death of Martha Morrison. On February 17, 2023, he was rightfully sentenced to an additional life term for the horrific crime he had committed in 1974. The families of Warren's known victims breathed a sigh of relief, understanding that while justice had finally been served, it could never undo their loss. They were grateful that the truth had finally come to light and that Warren would be held accountable for his actions, even though nothing could ever restore the loved ones he had taken from them. At this point, their next step was to move forward with their lives while treasuring the memories of those they had lost. Michael Morrison, Martha's half-brother, stated that further investigation was still needed regarding Warren's other potential victims. To him, the matter extended beyond his sister's murder to encompass the years of pain endured by all the affected families. Warren remains the primary suspect in at least 5 other homicide cases, and investigators are determined to continue their pursuit until they can definitively link him to each of the crimes he committed. Moving on to the next case. Megan McDonald. Born in 1983, Megan McDonald was only 7 months old when her parents moved to Middletown, New York. She had a sister named Karen and 2 younger brothers. From little league games to movies, Karen and Megan were inseparable best friends. Megan often rescued stray animals and showed remarkable compassion, even toward adults. In college, Karen met the love of her life, James Whalen. When James felt nervous about meeting Karen's family for the first time, 16-year-old Megan instantly made him feel welcome, so warm and kind that he felt like part of the family. Megan had a vivid imagination. She even named their cat Pumpkin James Whalen to include him as family, too. Megan graduated from Burke Catholic High School with the class of 2000. She then attended SUNY Orange in Middletown, a community college, happy to remain close to home. Megan loved children and considered pursuing a career that would allow her to work closely with them. In 2002, Megan's family faced a devastating tragedy when she lost her father, Dennis McDonald. At only 47 years old, Officer McDonald, a retired detective from the New York Police Department, unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack. Despite their heartbreak, the family remained close and still gathered to celebrate Christmas in 2002, unaware that it would be Megan's last Christmas with them. A family video captured Megan opening a box of sweaters and joyfully placing the bow on her head, showing just how warm and good-natured she was. Around that same period, Megan began her first job, marking the initial step in rebuilding her life after her father's passing. Karen fondly remembered the first time Megan bought coffee with money she had earned herself. She was so proud to have made it on her own. Megan felt a growing sense of independence and realized she could truly stand on her own feet. A year after losing her father, she decided it was time to move forward in life. In March 2003, Megan signed a lease for an apartment near Middletown in the small town of Wallkill, New York. She looked forward to beginning her adult life independently, but that dream would be tragically short-lived. Megan worked at the American Cafe in Galleria Mall and was on her shift from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on March 13, 2003. After finishing work, she walked to a nearby bank's ATM and withdrew cash at exactly 3:10 p.m. Later that day, she was seen in Greenway Terrace in Wallkill, New York. Two acquaintances were hosting a birthday party and invited her to join, but Megan declined. They went back inside and told others that Megan had plans with friends in Middletown. Later that evening, she was at a friend's house from 7:30 p.m. until midnight, watching the TV show Friends. When leaving, she mentioned that she needed to get some sleep, or she would be late for work the next day. Little did her friend know, it would be the last time she would see Megan alive. Instead of heading straight home, Megan stopped by the birthday party in the Greenway Terrace area of Wallkill. Two friends who were leaving the gathering saw her sitting in her car. They exchanged a few words, and Megan told them she was waiting to meet someone. It was around 12:30 a.m., just after midnight, marking the last time anyone saw Megan McDonald alive. When Megan did not show up for her afternoon shift at the American Cafe the following day, coworkers left voicemails on her phone. Her friends and family realized she was out of contact, not answering calls or responding to messages. Her mother asked Karen to check on her, since she was not replying. At first, Karen and James Whalen were frustrated, thinking Megan was being careless. But as time passed, their concern grew. They lived 2 hours away from where Megan was last seen, and no one could locate her. As daylight turned to night, and then another day, they were struck with devastating news. The following morning, a man and his nephew stumbled upon something horrifying. The owners of 229, Bowser Road in the town of Wallkill, noticed an object lying at an odd angle. To their horror, they realized it was the body of a young woman. They immediately called 911 to alert state police. New York State Police identified the body through her driver's license. It was Megan McDonald, the missing 20-year-old. An autopsy determined that she had been fatally struck with a blunt object. Detective Brad Natalizio explained that the area near Bowser Road was a narrow dirt path ending in a cul-de-sac, surrounded by an isolated field. Because the area was so remote, investigators concluded that Megan likely knew the person who led her there, as it would have been too dangerous to drive alone that far at night. Someone had been with Megan when she drove to that location, someone she trusted, and then that very person took her life. State police discovered that Megan owned a 1991 Mercury Sable, but the vehicle was missing from the crime scene, prompting a widespread search to locate it. Local authorities sought media assistance to help unravel Megan's mystery. A few days later, police received a tip that her car had been spotted at the Kensington Manor apartment complex. The investigation determined that the vehicle had been parked there since early morning, around 8 a.m. on March 14th, meaning it had remained there for quite some time. It was evident that the driver had left in haste. Investigators collected a large amount of evidence, gathering numerous items that could aid in obtaining a reliable DNA analysis. More than 700 pieces of evidence were bagged and preserved in storage. Officers deduced that someone had been seated in the driver's seat of Megan's car when she was fatally struck. Unfortunately, with no further leads, Meghan's case went cold for many years. Detectives Brad Natalizio and Michael Carletta, both of whom had grown up in the area, were well aware of the missing woman's story. For decades, Meghan's case remained the most enduring mystery in the community. 20 years later, on the 20th anniversary of Meghan's tragic death, her story was featured on the well-known TV program Dateline. The renewed attention reignited public interest and reinvigorated investigative efforts. In 2018, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit took over the case, aiming to create a psychological profile of the suspect and establish a plausible theory. After reviewing crime scene and autopsy photographs, along with extensive case files containing more than 800 leads and interviews, their conclusions matched those previously drawn by investigators at Troop F Barracks on Crystal Run Road in Wallkill. They concluded that the perpetrator displayed all the defining traits of narcissistic personality disorder, as described in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders by the American Psychiatric Association. A pervasive pattern of grandiosity in behavior or fantasy, a constant need for admiration, and a lack of empathy, beginning in early adulthood and manifesting in multiple contexts. Detectives Natalizio and Carletta were officially assigned to the case in 2017. Having grown up hearing stories about Meghan's disappearance, they already possessed valuable local insight. Natalizio, who was the same age as Meghan and also from Orange County, remained dedicated to the case even after transferring to other departments. When he joined the NYPD in 2006, his wife encouraged him to pursue Meghan's case if he ever earned a promotion. His wife, a registered nurse, had worked with Meghan's mother, giving the investigation a deeply personal connection. The detectives began by re-interviewing every witness and suspect. They revisited the Kensington Manor apartments, where they uncovered some compelling new information. Around 12:30 a.m., the night Meghan lost her life, a witness spotted her car. Meghan's car was white with a black stripe on the side, so it was something you would notice. But that is not what caught the witness's attention. There was loud music blaring from the system in the car, so loud that she had to look outside and check. There was another car trailing Meghan's vehicle, a dark Honda Civic hatchback. The complex has a big loop, so both of the cars circled back, the music still loud. It provided a timeline. Meghan was alive at 12:30 a.m., which means the crime occurred sometime between 12:30 a.m. and 8 a.m. The main theory was that two people followed Meghan in the car, somehow got into her back seat, and took her to Bowser Road, where her body was recovered. The assailant was in the back seat, and they had a friend in the passenger seat while Meghan drove. Whoever this person was, they had some control over Meghan, possibly psychologically. They drove to a secluded field off Bowser Road, a place where teenagers and young people would hang out to drink. The entrance was so tricky that a person would normally miss it, but the assailant knew exactly where he was taking them, and possibly knew that any confrontation would not be heard because the area was isolated. It was so quiet that one could hear a far-off train engine simply standing on the spot. Meghan possibly got into an argument with this person, which resulted in the perpetrator flying into a rage, hitting her repeatedly with a blunt object. The passenger sitting beside Meghan was possibly in shock. But whatever it was, the assailant managed to convince them not to go to the police. After disposing of her body, the two individuals returned her car and parked it before fleeing the scene. Investigators examined all the items collected from Meghan's vehicle, and in 2023, a private laboratory named Cybergenetics was assigned to reanalyze the DNA evidence using the latest advancements in forensic technology. For many years, a company called Lamar Advertising has provided free publicity for Meghan's case, sponsoring 7 billboards along State Route 17 in Orange and Sullivan counties, as well as on Interstate 84 in Orange County. These billboards encouraged anyone with information to come forward. The NYPD Detectives Union offered a $10,000 reward for information about Meghan's case, and the FBI added another $10,000, bringing the total to $20,000. Surprisingly, before DNA results could yield anything definitive, the Honda Civic with the loud sound system was identified. Investigators narrowed the case down to 2 suspects, one being Meghan's ex-boyfriend, Edward Hawley. The second suspect has never been publicly named, but was confirmed to have died in 2010. This second suspect had left a voicemail on Meghan's phone on March 9, 2003, at 1:24 a.m., with loud music playing in the background. Investigators also found that Megan had $21.92 remaining in her account after depositing $1,158.33 into her HSBC account, then overdrafting it by $869.92 on March 10th. During 3 separate police interviews, Holly admitted that he owed Megan $300 because she had helped him purchase a purple 1990 Honda Civic hatchback. Yes, the very same car investigators had been searching for. On the day of the crime, Megan had a confrontation with Edward Holly, which he admitted during each of his police interviews. Megan's landlord also came forward with new details. On March 13, 2003, around 9 a.m., the landlord saw a man inside Megan's apartment on Karen Drive. The man was her new boyfriend, whose name remains undisclosed in official records. About an hour later, Megan dropped him off at his residence on Sheffield Drive in Wallkill before heading to work. Interestingly, Megan initially avoided the party on Greenway Terrace because Edward Holly was attending. Based on witness testimony and police reports, it was determined that Megan had been attempting to purchase marijuana from several sources that evening. She placed a call at 10:57 p.m. and again at 11:25 p.m., but the person she contacted could not obtain any marijuana. Then, at 12:05 a.m., a witness spotted her at the ATK gas station on 152 Wisner Avenue in Middletown, where she asked the clerk for a Dutch, a slang term for a marijuana cigarette. The witness also observed her car parked outside, but saw no one else inside it. Megan contacted the second suspect multiple times throughout the night, with the final call occurring at 12:25 a.m. when she went to pick him up from his house on Cindy Lane in Wallkill. He sat in the passenger seat and told her he did not have any marijuana. Megan then said she would get some from Edward Holly. Witnesses later confirmed seeing Holly leave the party shortly before midnight on March 13th. Just after midnight on March 14th, both Holly and Megan's phones pinged off cell towers in the Scotchtown area of the town of Wallkill, which coincided with the time frame investigators believed Megan had picked up her assailant. Holly admitted that he knew Megan was outside the party, but claimed he went directly home to 66 Sandburg Court in Wallkill. However, both cell tower data and witness statements placed him near the crime scene. Holly had a documented history of domestic violence, and he had a strong motive to harm Megan since he owed her a significant amount of money. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit played a crucial role in assembling the final pieces of this complex case, supporting the theory that Holly may have argued with Megan. Known for being outspoken, Megan's sister Karen acknowledged that this theory made sense to the family. It was entirely possible that Megan had quarreled with her ex, leading him to lash out in a moment of rage. Megan's final outgoing call, made at 12:30 a.m., was to Holly, who claimed the purpose was merely to obtain marijuana. However, this made him the last person known to have seen her alive. Given his violent past, his presence near the scene, and his lack of honesty about being with her during the critical time frame, Holly became the prime suspect. On April 20th, 2023, New York State Police arrested Edward Holly and charged him with taking Megan's life in the second degree. Holly had previously been in a 2007 car crash that left him paralyzed from the waist down. At the time of his arrest, he was already in jail for violating probation related to a narcotics case in October 2021. Now 42 years old, Holly would have been 22 at the time of Megan's death. As officers wheeled him away in an orange jumpsuit, he shouted to the cameras that he was innocent and that he loved Megan. His 2 daughters ran to his side in an attempt to support him, while the McDonald family cried out for justice for Megan. A second suspect in the case allegedly took his own life and has yet to be publicly identified by police. Unfortunately, Holly was released without bail because prosecutors made a procedural error. They failed to present the case to a grand jury within the required time frame. Nevertheless, Edward Holly was required to appear in court in June and again in August, with his next hearing scheduled for after Thanksgiving. If convicted, he faces a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. Megan's family found solace in knowing that the person responsible for her brutal death had finally been identified. Karen expressed sorrow that her little sister would never get to see the series finale of her favorite show, Friends, but the family remains grateful that they were able to give Megan a proper farewell, something many families of similar cases never get the chance to do, as the victims' bodies are often not recovered as quickly. Moving on to the next case. Michelle Lung. Snapper Point is a conservation area in Australia located near Fraser Park Beach, close to Catherine Hill Bay, New South Wales. The area surrounding Cape Snapper Point attracts adventurous tourists who climb it in search of extraordinary photographs, as it is entirely composed of steep, uneven volcanic rocks. On April 24, 2016, at approximately 10:30 a.m., a group of hikers walking at the base of the promontory noticed a large object floating on the surface of the water. They immediately reported the discovery to law enforcement, and police arrived at the scene to recover the unidentified package. Upon examining the contents on shore, authorities discovered the body of an unidentified woman who bore multiple injuries, indicating that the victim had been brutally assaulted. Her identity remained unknown at first, but news reports described her as an Asian female between the ages of 20 and 30, of average height. 5 years earlier, at a major airport in the northern Sichuan province of the People's Republic of China, a 20-year-old girl named Lung departed during a torrential downpour. Tearfully, she said goodbye to her beloved mother. After her father's death in 2008, her mother had become the most important person in her life. Lung was flying from her native China to the distant country of Australia, where she had dreamed of studying since childhood. 11 hours later, her plane landed in Sydney. It was her first time making such a long journey alone, yet she was determined to fulfill her dream and faced every challenge with confidence. At the airport, she was greeted by her aunt and her cousin, who was only 2 years younger than Lung. New South Wales, the oldest and most populous state in Australia, is home to 1 in 3 Australians. It was there that Lung spent her early years after arriving in the country. Since moving to Australia, Lung lived happily with her 48-year-old aunt, her aunt's young husband, Derek Barrett, and her cousin in their camping-style home. Lung had her own private room, where she spent most of her free time. She loved reading and drawing, and would spend hours absorbed in her favorite pastimes. To adapt more easily to life in another country, Lung adopted the English name Michelle, becoming known as Michelle Lung. She enrolled at the University of Technology in Sydney, where she successfully studied economics and hospitality management. Michelle was intelligent, ambitious, and unafraid of new experiences, easily forming new friendships wherever she went. Like many girls of her age, she frequently shared photos on social media, showing herself drinking cocktails with friends, as well as images of her extreme adventures in hazardous natural locations. Michelle was an adventurous individual who could easily travel to Hobart for a vacation and routinely took day trips throughout New South Wales. In the weeks preceding her disappearance, she posted videos from West Head Lookout near Sydney Harbour, photographs from Resolute Beach north of the city, from Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, and from Jervis Bay on the south coast. On June 13, 2013, she visited Snapper Point, where she bravely photographed herself on the cliff's edge and uploaded this striking image to her Instagram account. Michelle excelled academically, made new friends, and secured a part-time job. Wanting to organize her personal life, she communicated regularly with men on dating platforms and went on trial dates. The woman maintained an active and busy lifestyle, attending classes during the day and then rushing to work on weekends. She ensured she met friends and visited unusual locations. On April 21, 2016, Michelle met a friend at the mall. They had lunch together, did some shopping, and afterward Michelle boarded a train at the station. She alighted at Central Station around 4:30 in the afternoon and was never seen again. 2 days later, Derek went to the train station to meet his wife, who had returned from a business trip. Michelle's aunt asked Derek about her niece, and he mentioned he had not seen her in 2 days. Derek Barrett had been unemployed for an extended period, so he often stayed up late at the computer and woke only in the afternoon. Therefore, it was plausible that he might not have seen Michelle. Yet the situation was such that nobody had seen Michelle since April 22nd, and her phone was turned off. After contacting all of Michelle's acquaintances and friends, the aunt became increasingly concerned. She examined the girl's room, which, as usual, was in perfect order. After reviewing the girl's laptop, the family deduced that Michelle had not returned from her date and that perhaps something had occurred to her. Her absence was particularly unusual as she regularly communicated with friends and family residing in China and Australia. The following day, Michelle's aunt and her husband Derek went to the police station and filed a missing persons report. They also informed the Chinese embassy of Michelle Lung's disappearance on April 24, 2016. Subsequently, The body of an unidentified woman, wrapped in a plastic bag, was found by a group of tourists at Snapper Point. While Michelle's relatives in China and Australia searched for her, local news outlets reported the discovery of the woman's body. A composite sketch of the victim made it evident that it was Michelle. It took the police 3 days to identify her after producing the sketch. From that moment, Michelle Lung was officially recorded as a missing person, and an investigation was initiated. After interviewing Michelle's close relatives who lived with her, the initial theory suggested she had been attacked by an unknown individual with whom she had arranged to meet that day. CCTV footage traced the girl's movements on the day she disappeared, but the surveillance cameras and recordings from the short train journey showed that Michelle was alone. According to her friends, she had no plans to meet anyone that day and was hurrying to get home. Reviewing her social media and correspondence did not indicate the presence of any young man with whom she might have met. The hypothesis of a secret stranger who could have committed the crime was not confirmed. Forensic examination results verified that Michelle's body had sustained multiple injuries and that she had most likely attempted to defend herself against her attacker, resulting in numerous stab wounds. Police Chief Inspector Gary Jubelin stated that the situation was interpreted as Michelle being brutally assaulted prior to her death, but since she was last seen on her way home and had not gone elsewhere, the assailant must have attacked her in that vicinity. The inspector also noted that the perpetrator had likely deliberately selected a very secluded section of such a scenic location, as the body was discovered in an area frequented by tourists and fishermen, yet somewhat isolated. Forensic analysis indicated that Michelle Lung's body had been in the water for no more than 48 hours, likely even less, suggesting it had been dumped very recently. The chief inspector of police noted that although the site where the body was found was distant from the national park entrance, there was a parking lot near the tourist area, implying the body may have been transported there by car. Homicide detectives examined CCTV and traffic camera footage to determine Michelle Lung's last known movements. They continued to contact her family, friends, and colleagues to collect additional information. Alongside the search efforts, interviews were conducted with relatives and acquaintances to reconstruct a detailed account of events and to gain a full understanding of the relationships within the family where Michelle resided. Police Inspector Gary Jubelin affirmed that, based on the gathered information, Michelle was a very responsible individual who consistently kept in touch with her family and informed them of her whereabouts. Consequently, there were serious concerns when she suddenly vanished. However, for 2 days, her family either did not notice her absence or chose to disregard it. Police subsequently called Derek Barrett in for questioning as the last person known to have seen Michelle alive. Investigators were skeptical of his explanations regarding nightlife and extended daytime naps, so he was re-interviewed. The investigators began questioning him about his relationship with Michelle and asked him to recall the last time he had seen her. Unable to endure the pressure of the interrogation, Derek refused to answer and requested a lawyer. Such unusual and uncertain behavior raised multiple doubts, and Derek was arrested as a suspect. The arrest, however, had a basis, as on the eve of the interrogation, investigators checked his cell phone signal and discovered that he had been in the same area where Michelle's body was found on April 24th. Furthermore, when police obtained surveillance footage from a parking lot, it captured a car matching the description of Derek Barrett's vehicle in the early hours of April 24th, leaving no doubt about his presence there. Derek denied the allegation, claiming until the end that it was merely a coincidence and that the car was not his, but the footage clearly proved his presence in the parking lot. Police charged a 27-year-old man in connection with the death of 25-year-old Michelle Lung. Her naked body, bearing multiple stab wounds, was discovered in a blowhole on the Central Coast, New South Wales. The news of Derek's arrest and charge left Michelle's entire family in shock. Police spoke with Michelle's mother, who was devastated by the news of her daughter's death. She rushed to Sydney to see the site linked to her only daughter's dreams and demise, yet she remained unable to comprehend her daughter's passing. Derek Barrett, aged 27, who was married to Michelle Lung's aunt, was charged with the murder of the 25-year-old student. This occurred after police released CCTV footage showing her last shopping trip in Sydney's Central Business District on April 21st, as well as her journey home. The footage depicts her shopping at a mall on Pitt Street before boarding a train at St. James Station to travel to Erskine Park in the southwest of Sydney. Police believe that Michelle returned to her family home in Erskine Park that afternoon, where she lived with her uncle, aunt, and cousin, and was presumably murdered there. The autopsy revealed that Michelle attempted to fend off her attacker and was stabbed multiple times in self-defense, sustaining over 30 stab wounds in total. CCTV footage is believed to have captured a vehicle entering Lake Monroe National Park around 7 a.m. on April 24th, and police claim Michelle Lung's body was inside the vehicle. Despite Derek Barrett being detained and charged, the investigation continued, and gradually further details of Michelle Lung's final moments emerged. Based on this information, additional charges were filed, including 5 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of installing a hidden camera, and murder. The investigation revealed that the suspect harbored an abnormal sexual interest in his wife's young niece. When Derek Barrett's cell phone was seized and submitted to experts for analysis and recovery of previously deleted data, the files recovered left no doubt that he was not only involved in Michelle's death, but also had an unhealthy fixation on her. It was discovered that Derek had installed a hidden camera in the shared bathroom, concealed behind toiletry items, and routinely reviewed the recordings. The phone also contained images captured shortly before Michelle's death. From these images, it became evident that Michelle had returned home on April 21st at around 5 p.m., and around midnight, she sent her last text message from her phone, after which she could no longer be contacted. Late at night, Derek Barrett began executing his malicious plan. He entered Michelle's room while she was asleep to carry out his customary pattern of assault and gratification. However, the girl awoke, and Derek attacked her. He restrained her and covered her mouth with duct tape to keep her silent. The deviant kept her tied to the bed for 2 days and intermittently abused her, as evidenced by the photographs on his phone. Investigators found Michelle bound, naked, and with a look of terror on her face, lying on the bed. In these photos, however, Michelle had not yet sustained the injuries that ultimately caused her death. Derek's final photograph of her was taken around 8 a.m. on April 23rd, and at that time, Michelle was still alive. On April 23rd, Derek left and returned home twice during the day and did not hear any sounds from Michelle. Derek was taking a shower at that time. Surveillance cameras showed that he left the apartment 4 times to take out the trash. Presumably, by then, Michelle was already dead. Derek showered, removed any traces of blood, and then thoroughly cleaned the apartment, concealing evidence of the crime and Michelle's disappearance. On April 24th at 7 a.m., Derek drove to Snapper Point. Along the way, he stopped at a gas station where he purchased drinks and refueled his car, an action captured on CCTV cameras. Upon arriving at Snapper Point, he disposed of Michelle's body and took some photographs around 9 a.m. Afterwards, Derek visited his parents, who noticed nothing unusual in his behavior, and then returned home to await his wife's return with complete composure. He repeatedly claimed that he had not seen Michelle and that the girl had not returned home, and cynically accompanied his wife to the police station to file a missing persons report. On June 29, 2016, the first court hearing was held. Barrett's lawyer, Bill Whitby, informed the local court that Barrett was pleading not guilty and that he was as shocked and upset by Michelle's death as the rest of the family. Michelle Lung's friends and family were present in the crowded courtroom, but Derek Barrett was not required to attend in person. He appeared later via video link. The fact is that the day before, the defendant had stated that he did not remember much of the hours preceding Michelle Lung's murder because he had taken illegal drugs. He also told the court that he only had vague recollections of the 2-hour drive to Snapper Point, where he threw Michelle Lung's body off the cliff. Prior to attending the court hearing, Derek Barrett was evaluated by a psychologist. However, forensic psychologist Dr. Richard First challenged the defendant's claims of memory loss. He testified and concluded that Derek Barrett was mentally competent to receive the full extent of his sentence. Dr. First testified that the drugs the suspect had taken did not induce memory loss and that all of his actions, from the murder to the disposal of the body, were deliberate and intentional. The respected forensic psychiatrist Dr. Richard First further stated that Derek Barrett's intelligence, concentration, and memory were all within the normal range. He did not accept Barrett's claims of memory loss and noted that the number of stab wounds demonstrated sadistic tendencies rather than memory lapses or impulsive emotional reactions. The psychologist also dismissed Derek Barrett's assertion that he did not feel sexual attraction toward the victim. Dr. Richard First informed the court that the accused had feigned amnesia in an attempt to reduce his accountability for the crime after claiming he could not remember the period during which he captured and murdered Michelle Lung. During the trial, Derek Barrett attempted to justify his actions by asserting that he was addicted to illegal drugs. This claim was refuted by Dr. Richard First, who highlighted its self-contradictory nature, noting that the suspect had gained weight during that period. Judge Wilson remarked that in her 30-year career as a criminal defense attorney, she had never encountered an obese, substance-dependent individual. Regrettably, there was nothing authentic in Derek Barrett's behavior in the courtroom. In Sydney, his demeanor during proceedings gave the impression of a psychopath. His crime was not the result of a drunken night, poor life choices, or childhood trauma. In August, during a retrial hearing, Derek Barrett pleaded guilty to murdering and kidnapping Michelle Lung, as well as twice entering her room while she slept to record videos. He also admitted to taking 19 explicit photographs of Michelle Lung shortly before her death. Barrett claimed he could not recall the 48-hour period during which he killed the girl, including cleaning the crime scene and disposing of her body, because he was under the influence of illegal substances. He stated that his only memories were of an argument, blood in the bathroom, and the terrified face of his niece screaming at him. However, Judge Wilson stated that she did not believe Derek Barrett's claims of memory loss, nor that he was genuinely remorseful for his actions. The Lung family consoled one another while Derek Barrett wiped away tears, telling them, "I deserve to live. This should never have happened." In passing sentence, Judge Helen Wilson condemned Derek Barrett's actions as depraved and sadistic, committed by a person in a position of trust. The judge outlined Barrett's disturbing fantasies and actions in court, making it clear that he had failed to deceive anyone. Although the events were deeply imprinted in his mind, Barrett claimed they were merely vague memories. During the court sessions, Barrett showed no emotion and repeatedly spoke the victim's name. Chief Inspector Gary Jubelin of the NSW Police Homicide Unit stated that the crime was horrific and senseless, and while justice had been served, there was no joy in such a case. Judge Wilson sentenced 28-year-old Barrett to 34 years and 6 months in prison, with a maximum term of 46 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2050. Barrett displayed no emotional reaction during sentencing. Michelle's mother, Mrs. Zhang, expressed gratitude to the Australian and Chinese communities for their support during her period of immense grief. She also thanked the NSW police, including Detective Inspector Jubelin, for their investigation into her daughter's death. A fund was established to cover the costs of Ms. Lung's funeral and to provide support for her mother when she returns to China. However, Michelle Lung's tragic story did not end there. For years after the crime, an unexpected event occurred. A woman visiting her elderly, dementia-affected mother discovered an unknown USB device in her mother's hands. Upon examination, the device contained disturbing videos and photographs of Michelle Lung's abuse shortly before her murder. The police were able to match the images to those that Derek Barrett had deleted from his phone in an attempt to conceal his crimes. In 2020, Barrett was charged with additional sexual offenses based on this new evidence. Prosecutor Hugh Baker informed the court that the elderly woman had no connection to Barrett, and there was no explanation for how the USB device came into her possession. The horrifying and depraved secret, uncovered by chance, resulted in Barrett receiving additional years of punishment on top of his already lengthy sentence. Friends and acquaintances commemorated Michelle Lung on Chinese and Australian social media. This tragic story underscores the importance of addressing the underlying factors that can contribute to such crimes, such as idleness, lack of purpose, and indifference. Cherishing life and being mindful of each day is essential, as we can never predict which day will be our last. Moving on to the next case. Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, Colleen married a man named David. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after marrying David, the couple had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent much of her time outdoors, riding her bike around town, swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also attended Sunday school at the local church, where she often volunteered to help other children who struggled with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old and in the 4th grade at the local elementary school, Her mother worked the night shift at a store, while her stepfather spent most of the day on the farm. This often left Rowan to fend for herself, fostering a sense of independence. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mother went to work, and her stepfather had not yet returned from the farm. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen returned from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, only to find her daughter missing. She asked her husband where Rowan was, and he said that she had asked to have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had allowed it. He did not ask the friend's name, trusting that nothing would happen in their small town. Colleen's concern grew, and she began checking with all of Rowan's friends. Since the town had only a few streets, it did not take long, but none of them had seen her, and she had not stayed at any of their homes. This made her mother even more worried. Colleen searched the entire town, but could not find her daughter. Returning home, she told her husband that Rowan was missing and asked him to call the police. But he reassured her that everything was fine and that Rowan would come home soon. After several more hours without any sign of Rowan, Colleen called 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. The sheriff went to their house to speak with David, as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared. David explained that on the evening in question, while working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan had stopped by. They decided to go to David's house to drink and play pool. They stopped at the store to buy alcohol and spent several hours at David's home. Later, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him back to the neighboring town where his trailer was located, and they convinced David to join them to continue the gathering. Before leaving, David checked on Rowan in her room and saw that she was asleep. David then left with his friends, and they stopped at the store again for more alcohol before heading to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and ask Nathan for a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway, as he was quite drunk and did not want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off at home and then drove back to his own residence. David went straight to bed. Soon afterward, Rowan woke him and asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and returned to sleep. Police approached this story with skepticism. What puzzled them most was that a 9-year-old girl would decide to go to a friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather would let her go without asking which friend she meant. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or could have been directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. Stella had a population of only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread quickly throughout the county. Residents were accustomed to letting their children play outside without worry, as nothing had ever happened in such a quiet place. But now, with Rowan vanished without a trace and the police unable to locate her for an entire day, the town was in a state of panic. The search on the first day yielded no results. The investigation progressed on November 4th when police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated that he had not spoken with Rowan or any of her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, police still could not find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As skepticism toward David's account grew, detectives began considering a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and confirmed that none had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised further suspicion. His details were inconsistent and contradictory, and he altered the timeline of his whereabouts multiple times. Additionally, David suggested that it was possible Rowan had left without his permission, which only made his story more dubious. During the investigation, FBI agents discovered that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially withheld from police. This new information prompted authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. Unfortunately, no evidence was found in either vehicle. As part of the investigation, detectives sought to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he repeated the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception. After leaving the station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled him to stop. As the sheriff of Witten, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. He was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and someone Christopher had always respected and turned to for advice in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark had not been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Police Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be withholding information. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider that Christopher might be concealing crucial details linking David to Rowan's disappearance. They also questioned whether Christopher's actions were influenced by David and whether he feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark informed the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search's progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen and saw Christopher there. They questioned him again, and he repeated his previous account. However, for the first time, Christopher mentioned that he did not rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David in an attempt to obtain a confession. Detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest potential locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives also searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Christopher later visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was still withholding information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might possess crucial knowledge that could help prove David's involvement. The FBI asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to be forthcoming, as he had been in regular contact with Clark regarding the case. It appeared that Christopher wanted to share important details, but hesitated for unknown reasons. On November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe at David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still kept some belongings. Christopher agreed, and he also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, he voluntarily provided a DNA sample and consented to answer the detectives' questions again. During questioning, he was asked to confirm David's account, but this time Christopher revealed that his friend's story was not entirely accurate. Investigators pressed him to disclose what had truly happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station, warning detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, he met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detective's behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent, but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had additional information. Clark continued to encourage him to open up, and eventually Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher had formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children, who came to treat him like one of their own and affectionately called him Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to speak, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Clark then reached out to the FBI to update them, explaining that Christopher was close to disclosing what he knew, but cautioning that pressuring him could make him defensive and prompt him to seek legal counsel. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day, but initially yielded no results. A breakthrough came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and discovered a large pit in the fields and woods. When authorities examined the site, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents contacted Sheriff Clark, requesting that he speak with Christopher again, hoping that the gravity of finding Rowan's body would make Christopher more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station seeking him and told other officers that he urgently needed to speak with Clark. Clark began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher himself contacted Clark, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after learning about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car trailing him. Sheriff Clark reassured Christopher that he knew nothing about any surveillance and suggested they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concern for his safety. He feared that, with Rowan's body discovered, he might be accused of murder and that someone could seek revenge against him. Clark escorted Christopher to the police station, where Christopher stated that now that the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked him to explain what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that too many people were around and suggested moving to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once there, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but attempted to reassure him that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insisted that what he was about to disclose would change everything and that Clark would then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He said that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose back roads to avoid the police. Christopher then revealed to Clark, shocking him, that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, he took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through a field. Christopher drove directly to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection while she slept. Once they reached his trailer, Christopher sexually assaulted Rowan. The assault was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried to free herself, but she was unable to escape. During the crime, Christopher deliberately took precautions to avoid recognition, keeping the lights off and maintaining silence throughout the act. He had initially intended to return Rowan to her home, feigning innocence. But under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally saw Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. Christopher grabbed a rope, resorted to force, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. In a state of panic, he frantically considered ways to conceal the crime. He got into his car and drove around the county, pondering methods for disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed there. Upon arrival, he dumped Rowan's body into the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher noticed traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He realized he also needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used in her murder. He collected these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. He quickly reconsidered, however, realizing that a large fire would attract attention. Instead, he dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher had been withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, and who had 3 young children of his own, could commit such a brutal act. Although Christopher appeared outwardly good-natured, his true character proved far more alarming. After finishing his account, Christopher voluntarily accompanied Clark to the police station. Once there, he repeated his confession to FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also granted authorities permission to search his trailer and car. At the conclusion of his confession, Christopher expressed deep remorse, stating that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. Detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's previous suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, investigators suspected he might be covering for his friend. During interrogation, however, David provided shocking new testimony. He claimed that when he discovered Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher had taken her. He borrowed his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer, where he found Rowan lying on the bed and Christopher leaning over her. Instead of rescuing her, David admitted that he joined in and also sexually assaulted Rowan. He further claimed that he assisted Christopher in killing her and disposing of her body. David reported that the traumatic nature of the incident caused his brain to go into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. Detectives, astonished by this revelation, immediately re-interviewed Christopher to verify David's claims. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that the incident had unfolded exactly as he had initially described. The inconsistencies between their accounts puzzled the detectives, yet Christopher's testimony still aligned with the events as they had occurred. Medical examination confirmed that the victim had been strangled with a thin rope, a detail only the killer could have known. A search of Christopher's trailer revealed a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was discovered in his car. Although investigators remained uncertain about the full truth of each man's account, both David and Christopher had made incriminating statements. Consequently, David was also arrested, and the case proceeded to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded, arguing that he had not been aware they could be used against him and that his rights had been violated. The judge rejected this request, ruling that all of Christopher's conversations with investigators had been voluntary. Christopher also attempted to introduce mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood, which included being shuffled between biological and foster parents, as a contributing factor to his actions. Despite these efforts, he was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after Rowan's murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but his appeals were unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was far more complex. Although David admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant legal complication. Charging David with murder could have risked overturning Christopher's conviction, potentially allowing David to evade full accountability. However, due to a lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA linking him directly to the murder, authorities remained uncertain about David's actual involvement. While it was possible that he had collaborated with Christopher, there was no evidence to substantiate this claim. To reduce the risk of jeopardizing Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the strategic decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. He received an 11-year prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David had indeed participated in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. The sentence is now final, and it is highly unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains on death row, but the execution of the sentence is uncertain due to the typically lengthy delays between sentencing and execution, which can span decades. As a result, he may spend the remainder of his life in prison. Moving on to the next case. Sabrina Cooter. Sabrina Cooter was born on December 5, 1982, in a suburb of London. She is of both French and Algerian descent through her parents, a combination that contributed to her striking appearance and distinctive character. The eldest of 4 children, her family relocated to Paris when she was 2 years old, and she grew up there. However, Sabrina's complex personality began to reveal itself when she started school. Her former classmates described her as fierce, domineering, and self-centered. She found it difficult to make friends and was particularly unfriendly toward other smart and beautiful girls, whom she viewed as rivals. With her stunning looks and tall stature, Sabrina could have pursued a modeling career if she had learned to be more pleasant with others. Yet, throughout her childhood and youth, she often preferred to manipulate people rather than care about their feelings. Sabrina participated in both sports and music as a child, but she lacked perseverance and never achieved real success in either area. While in school, she sustained a back injury during sports, which required her to use prescription painkillers. Later, she attempted to obtain these painkillers illegally, resulting in her arrest and an official warning. Sabrina was highly self-absorbed and focused on her appearance, constantly seeking admiration and attention. She was convinced that she was destined for a luxurious, glamorous, and famous life. For years, her delusions prevented her from facing reality, as she firmly believed that her true place was in Hollywood. Although Sabrina graduated from the Sorbonne with a degree in English and French literature, since 2006, she had frequently changed careers within the fashion industry. She worked as a stylist, makeup artist, and fashion designer, despite lacking genuine expertise in any of these professions. Sabrina was an attractive young woman with a strong desire to charm men. However, she only exploited their affection and never formed serious relationships, always waiting for the perfect man, a prince who would grant her every wish. After graduation, Sabrina still had no clear direction for her life, feeling entitled to enjoy luxury and ease without putting in any effort. Eventually, she enrolled at the prestigious Sorbonne University and took a part-time job at a sweet shop to earn some income. It was there that she met Wissam Midhouni, a man 6 years her senior. Wissam worked as a manager at the headquarters of a major French company while pursuing a master's degree to advance his career. He loved Sabrina deeply and was eager to fulfill all her desires. Sabrina also found Wissam appealing and viewed him as someone she could easily control. Moreover, she saw in Wissam her gateway to a wealthy and comfortable life. He was ambitious and capable of achieving great success, always ready to indulge Sabrina's whims. The two began their relationship in 2000 and, after several months, decided to move in together. However, Sabrina quickly revealed her true nature by controlling Wissam in every aspect of his life. If Wissam failed to meet her demands, she would become enraged and even resort to physical violence against him. Sabrina also openly cheated on Wissam without any attempt to conceal or justify her actions. She engaged in relationships with various men, including Wissam's close friends, colleagues, and even random acquaintances. Although Wissam tried numerous times to end the relationship and walk away from her, he was unable to escape his deep emotional attachment to Sabrina. In 2001, Wissam earned his master's degree and received a promotion, which brought him a substantial increase in income. However, Wissam spent most of his earnings on luxury items and on indulging Sabrina's extravagant lifestyle. Both Wissam and Sabrina shared French-Algerian roots. According to some accounts, during the fall of 2001, the couple held a private Muslim wedding ceremony, which was certified and registered by the Argentine Mosque. The couple eventually had a son, but years later, another man named Anthony Francois came forward claiming to be the child's biological father. In 2008, the global financial crisis struck severely, leading the company where Wissam worked to go bankrupt, and he lost his high-paying position. At that time, Sabrina decided to move to London without consulting Wissam. Having no remaining career prospects in France, Wissam decided to follow Sabrina to London. Upon his arrival in London, Wissam managed to secure employment at a major bank. However, Sabrina struggled to find opportunities in the fashion industry, lacking the necessary skills, experience, and formal training required in the field. She later attempted several different jobs in pursuit of a breakthrough. She worked as a nanny, call center operator, cafe employee, and even tried her hand at marketing. Sabrina's career aspirations eventually shifted toward becoming a musician and composer. Despite her efforts, she continued to face challenges in finding stable opportunities within the music industry. She attended numerous auditions and social gatherings to expand her network. At one of these events, Sabrina met Mark Walton, a well-known musician and composer who had previously been a member of the famous boy band Boyzone. After leaving the group, Mark had become a highly successful music producer, collaborating with prominent international artists such as Jennifer Lopez, Jessica Simpson, and Lady Gaga. By 2016, Mark's net worth had surpassed $1 billion. Mark was exactly the type of man who could open the doors of fame and luxury for Sabrina. She captivated him instantly with her beauty and charm, and Mark later admitted that he fell in love with her at first sight. Their relationship developed rapidly. Sabrina immediately ended her relationship with Wissam. Nothing could stand in her way. Within just a few weeks, she moved in with Mark, residing in a luxurious home in one of London's upscale neighborhoods. Mark covered all expenses, including the rent for the lavish residence that Sabrina had personally chosen. For several months, Sabrina enjoyed the luxurious lifestyle she had always dreamed of, socializing with celebrities, attending high-society events, wearing designer clothes, and even appearing in magazines. However, when Sabrina's jealousy toward every woman around Mark spiraled out of control, her true nature once again surfaced. She became increasingly demanding, constantly asking for extravagant gifts. Mark indulged her with expensive designer clothing, fine jewelry, and lavish outings to exclusive restaurants and clubs, but nothing ever satisfied her. Their household staff changed frequently, as Sabrina's paranoia led her to believe that the maids were either stealing from her or attempting to seduce Mark. Her irrational and possessive behavior eventually became unbearable for Mark. In 2011, he ended their relationship and moved to California, leaving Sabrina with no financial support. After their breakup, Sabrina began giving interviews in which she accused Mark of being abusive and having a severe substance abuse problem. She called him repeatedly, crying and begging him to return to her, even threatening to take her own life. Despite her emotional pleas, Mark refused to reconcile. Realizing she could not win him back, Sabrina reached out to Wiesem, who by then had become a successful bank executive. Still deeply in love with her, Wiesem agreed to forgive her, and after a period of separation, they reconciled and resumed living together. When Sabrina became pregnant with Wiesem's child, she contacted Mark and claimed that the baby was his. Through his lawyer, Mark stated that he was willing to support Sabrina and the unborn child financially. He offered to provide monthly child support payments, but Sabrina rejected the amount and demanded double what he proposed. When Mark refused, he requested a paternity test once the baby was born. Sabrina, however, declined to take the test, prompting Mark to suspend his payments. Enraged, Sabrina filed a lawsuit against him. She began spreading false accusations on social media, alleging that Mark was jealous, had threatened both her and Wiesem, broken into their home, attacked Wiesem, and sexually assaulted her in degrading ways. However, Sabrina was unable to provide any evidence for her claims, as Mark had been living in the United States since their breakup, making it impossible for him to have been involved in any of the alleged incidents. When Mark filed a countersuit and the police warned Sabrina of potential legal consequences, she ceased making the accusations. Once the dispute seemed settled, she spent most of her time in Wimbledon, southwest London, living with Wiesem and their 2 children. Managing household duties and caring for 2 young children proved overwhelming, so Sabrina decided to hire a nanny to help her. She posted a job advertisement online and personally conducted the interviews. Most candidates failed to meet her expectations, and those who did were unable to tolerate her behavior and did not stay long in her employment. A young French woman named Sophie Lionnet responded to an advertisement for a babysitter. At that time, Sophie was 19 years old and living in her native France, so the interview was conducted through a video call. Sophie agreed to all the conditions of employment, which included childcare, housekeeping, and cooking, for a weekly wage of £50. Sophie was born on January 7, 1996, in the small town of Troyes, located between Auxerre and Senators. Her parents, Catherine and Patrick Lionnet, were laborers, and the family lived in very poor financial circumstances. After finishing her studies, Sophie earned a degree in childcare but had no desire to remain in her hometown. Instead, she dreamed of moving to a large city to build her career. Although Sophie was shy, introverted, and plain in appearance, she was known for her kindness and open-minded nature, which made her well-liked by those around her. Sophie had poor eyesight and was required to wear glasses constantly. During their initial conversation, Sabrina quickly realized that Sophie was naive and inexperienced, which made her an ideal person for Sabrina to exploit. Additionally, Sophie was eager to gain experience and was willing to work for a minimal wage. Having told her parents that Sabrina was a respectable and trustworthy employer, Sophie believed that working for her would be a promising start to her career as a nanny. At first, everything appeared to go smoothly. Sophie cared for the children diligently and handled household chores responsibly. This peaceful period lasted for several months without any major issues. However, the situation changed dramatically when Wiesem lost his job. At that point, the family's only income came from Mark's monthly child support payments. As a result, they began facing severe financial problems, struggling to pay high rent and cover basic living expenses. Unwilling to give up her luxurious lifestyle, Sabrina became increasingly irritable and hostile, often directing her anger towards Sophie, the young nanny. In an attempt to recover financially, Sabrina and Wiesem invested their remaining money in a bakery business, but the venture failed. Sabrina then tried to open a clothing boutique, but lacked sufficient funds. She reached out to Mark for financial help, asking for a large sum of money, but he firmly refused, leaving her frustrated and resentful. What followed next varies depending on the source, as different versions of the story exist. Some accounts claim that Sabrina devised a malicious plan to use Sophie as a pawn to blackmail Mark. She allegedly imagined that Sophie was Mark's accomplice and secret lover, planted in her household to sabotage her life and endanger her children. Sabrina convinced herself that the naive and gullible Sophie was infatuated with Mark. She believed that recording a false confession from Sophie, on video or audio, would provide enough evidence to accuse Mark of cruelty and demand financial compensation from him. However, Sophie refused to fabricate lies on camera. Another account, attributed to Sabrina's mental instability, claims that she genuinely believed in her conspiracy theory and truly perceived Sophie as an enemy and a danger to her family. According to this version, Sabrina did not coerce Sophie into lying, but sincerely believed that Sophie was Mark's accomplice, who had infiltrated their home to harm them. Regardless of the truth, Sophie's life soon turned into a nightmare. She was first subjected to excessively long working hours and severely underpaid. Working from dawn until nightfall, she had no personal freedom and was essentially trapped inside the house. Eventually, her salary was stopped entirely. To prevent her from escaping or returning to France, Sabrina confiscated her passport, effectively holding her captive. All communication with her family was tightly monitored. As time passed, Sophie's circumstances deteriorated further. She was barely given food and was repeatedly coerced to invent lies about Mark, a man she had never even met. Sophie endured constant verbal abuse, humiliation, and threats. She was accused of stealing money and valuables and was threatened with imprisonment if she refused to obey Sabrina's orders. When intimidation failed, Sabrina resorted to harsher and more sadistic measures. Sophie was confined to a cold basement and fed only small portions of food. She grew frail and emaciated. Yet hunger and cold were not the worst of her suffering. She endured brutal physical assaults and extreme torture. In one violent outburst, Sabrina broke Sophie's nose. This incident highlighted the escalating cruelty and made the situation even more horrifying. Sabrina's brutality intensified with each passing day, subjecting Sophie to unrelenting torment. The basement of their house, situated in an upscale neighborhood of London, became Sophie's prison and place of agony, where she endured pain without any chance of rescue. A peculiar event occurred in the late summer of 2017 when Sabrina brought Sophie to the police, claiming that Sophie was prepared to testify against Mark. However, Sophie stayed silent throughout the visit. When officers decided to speak with her privately, they took her to a separate room. At that moment, Sabrina grew increasingly anxious, fearing that Sophie might reveal the atrocities happening in their home, which would implicate both her and her husband. Strangely, Sophie chose not to disclose anything or seek help. The police reaction was equally troubling. Despite noticing that the young woman appeared malnourished, terrified, and weak, they failed to contact a doctor or psychologist to assess her condition. At that time, 21-year-old Sophie weighed under 40 kilograms, had lost some of her hair, was missing a front tooth, and walked with a visible limp. Nevertheless, none of this seemed to concern the police, who simply sent everyone back home. By mid-September, Sophie made her final phone call to her mother. She confided that she wanted to come home, but lacked the money to do so. Sophie's mother, Catherine, reassured her, promising to buy the ticket and telling her to pack her belongings immediately. This was the last time Sophie ever spoke with her mother. On the evening of September 20th, 2017, an unexpected incident occurred at Sabrina's residence. A neighbor contacted the police to report a fire in the yard. What alarmed them most, however, was not the fire itself, but the disturbing odor emanating from it, a smell resembling burnt flesh and hair mixed with something unidentifiable. The stench filled the air and clung to the clothes and skin of those nearby. When firefighters and police arrived, they quickly extinguished the flames. Strangely, the homeowner appeared calm and seemed unaware of why the authorities had come to her property. Among the ashes, police spotted what looked like a charred human hand. Sabrina and Wissam were immediately arrested, and the severely burned remains were removed from the scene. At first, the victim's identity, sex, and age were unknown, but soon the body was confirmed to be that of Sophie Lionnet, identified by the melted metal frame of her eyeglasses fused to her skull. Determining Sophie's exact cause of death was extremely difficult. Forensic experts discovered extensive injuries, including multiple broken ribs, a fractured jaw, and evidence of blunt force trauma to her skull and limbs, all inflicted while she was still alive. Furthermore, several of her teeth were missing, and her nose showed severe damage, indicating repeated and violent beatings. The discovery of horrifying video recordings of abuse found inside the house revealed the full extent of Sophie's suffering. She had been viciously attacked with fists, iron wires, golf clubs, and even subjected to electric shocks. She also endured extreme humiliation, including being forced to hold her head in a toilet bowl until she nearly suffocated. Experts concluded that Sophie likely died of asphyxiation shortly before her body was burned, which at least spared her the agony of being burned alive. During the trial, both Sabrina and Wissam denied any guilt and showed no remorse for their actions. After the murder, Wissam calmly went to a nearby supermarket to purchase fuel used to burn Sophie's body and then prepared dinner for his family as though nothing had happened. The couple's first trial began in March 2018. Sabrina tried to depict herself as the victim, claiming that Mark's alleged torment had driven her into a psychological breakdown. However, medical evaluations confirmed that although Sabrina had a mental disorder, she was not insane and was fully aware of her actions. Wissam, though physically stronger, was psychologically dependent on Sabrina. Her dominance over him was absolute, and he obeyed her commands without question. A former lover of Sabrina testified during the trial, describing her as a cunning manipulator rather than a mentally unstable woman. On June 26, 2018, the court found Sabrina Cowder and Wissam Madani guilty of torturing, humiliating, and murdering their nanny, Sophie. The couple were sentenced to life imprisonment and required to serve at least 30 years before becoming eligible for parole. However, neither of them admitted guilt. They continuously appealed for a reduced sentence. At one point, Sabrina even attempted to feign insanity in order to be transferred to a psychiatric hospital instead of remaining in prison. Nevertheless, this plan ultimately failed. Mark Walton, who was present at the trial, expressed deep regret over his past relationship with Sabrina. He stated that she had committed these horrific crimes in an attempt to gain his attention and extract money from him. Mark also extended his heartfelt condolences to Sophie's grieving parents. Moving on to the next case. Stephanie and her family. In April 2009, Stephanie Parente's friends and college officials grew concerned when she failed to attend her classes on a Monday, knowing she would not miss her final exams. College officials contacted a local hotel to request a welfare check on Stephanie and her family. When staff attempted to enter the room reserved by the family, a housekeeper found the door locked and received no response from inside. Once hotel personnel gained entry, they discovered a gruesome and deeply disturbing scene. Investigations later revealed the horrifying events that had occurred in the room, shocking not only those familiar with the family, but also the local community and the state at large. This marks the tragic case of the Parente family. William Michael Parente was born on July 20, 1949, in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, to parents Willie and Rulon Parente, who provided the foundation for his upbringing. Coming from a family with a history in law enforcement, his father having served as a New York trooper, Parente's childhood was marked by a solitary existence. As the sole focus of his parents' attention, he spent summers enjoying family time in Long Beach. He pursued his education at Brooklyn College and Brooklyn Law School, with financial support from his uncle Anthony J. Russo, who generously covered his tuition. In his bustling Manhattan office on the Avenue of the Americas, Parente earned respect as a diligent legal professional and devoted family man. Known for his consistent courtesy, even toward his loyal secretary, Parente maintained long, but not excessive working hours. His disciplined lifestyle, which excluded profanity and post-work socializing, distinguished him in the legal field. He never cursed or spoke harshly to anyone, even on difficult days. In 1977, he married Betty Mazzarella. After admission to the New York bar, he began his legal career at a prestigious Wall Street law firm. However, in 1988, upon learning Betty was pregnant with their first child, Parente transitioned to private practice. This change coincided with the family's relocation to Garden City, New York, an affluent Nassau County suburb on Long Island. Despite living in the suburbs, the Parentes maintained close ties to William's Brooklyn roots. They frequently revisited his old neighborhood, enjoying local foods, reconnecting with lifelong friends, visiting his mother, and reliving cherished childhood memories, such as their annual Halloween tradition of trick-or-treating in familiar surroundings with their daughters. At age 60, William Parente was an experienced estate and tax attorney operating his practice from a firm in a shopping center in Queens, while his wife, Betty, 58, focused on homemaking and actively organized charity fundraisers within the community. Betty Parente was also actively involved in church activities, playing a prominent role in the social fabric of their community. The couple shared the joys of raising two daughters, Stephanie and Catherine. Stephanie, the eldest at 19, was a sophomore at Loyola College in Towson, about 3 hours from their hometown. She studied speech pathology with aspirations of pursuing dentistry and was well-liked by both classmates and faculty, maintaining strong friendships back home in Garden City. Their younger daughter, Catherine, aged 11, demonstrated remarkable talent and was highly regarded by her teachers at Garden City Middle School, showcasing a promising future for the family's cherished youngest member. In the later stages of his legal career, William Parente had expanded into bridge loans, effectively functioning as a financial intermediary akin to a bank. He reportedly used assets from investment portfolios he managed to fund these loans. When at least one investor requested the return of their funds, Parente was unable to promptly fulfill the request or provide an adequate explanation. On April 15, 2009, William, accompanied by Betty and their youngest daughter Catherine, traveled to Towson to surprise Stephanie at college. They booked room N29 at the Sheraton Hotel near Towson Town Center Mall, with reservations extending through April 19th. Upon their arrival, Stephanie's friends noted her surprise at the visit, especially as classes had just resumed after Easter break and she was preparing for a chemistry exam. The family had also scheduled an on-campus meeting for Friday, April 17th, to discuss Stephanie's potential study abroad plans in England. Despite the initial shock, the visit began like any typical family reunion. The events of that tragic Sunday morning, however, would take a horrifying turn. Evidence later revealed that Betty Parente was the first victim, subjected to a brutal assault and suffocation, left lifeless in bed. Shortly afterward, Catherine suffered the same violent fate and was placed beside her mother. Later in the afternoon, Stephanie arrived from campus and was also killed in the same manner, her body laid beside her mother and sister. None of the victims showed signs of struggle, nor were there indications of drugging or physical restraint. William Parente had meticulously orchestrated the annihilation of his family that somber Sunday. Around midnight on April 19th, one of Stephanie's close friends and roommates became concerned when she failed to return to their dorm room after several hours. The roommate called the hotel where Stephanie was supposed to be studying for her final exams. William Parente answered the phone instead, claiming that Stephanie was staying at the hotel with her family. The roommate accepted the explanation, unaware that Stephanie had already been killed. In hindsight, the roommate later noted that Parente sounded different over the phone, unlike his usual demeanor. Early Monday morning, Parente took his own life in the hotel bathroom, using a knife he had purchased from a nearby mall. He fatally wounded himself and died from the injuries. Concern arose when the family failed to check out of the hotel, and Loyola College officials grew alarmed over Stephanie's unexplained absence from classes, particularly during a critical period for her final exams. College officials contacted the hotel, requesting a welfare check on Stephanie and her family. Around 3 p.m., a housekeeper attempted to enter the family's room on the 10th floor, but found the door locked and received no response. The housekeeper informed other staff members, prompting the hotel manager to enter the room. Inside, the manager discovered William Parente's lifeless body in the bathroom, the result of a self-inflicted knife wound. Emergency services were called immediately. As the manager proceeded further into the room, he found the 3 other victims, Betty Parente and her daughters, Stephanie and Catherine, arranged on one of the beds. Baltimore County Police were summoned, and other guests on the 10th floor were evacuated as part of the investigation. The family's Mercedes-Benz SUV was also secured by law enforcement. Police concluded that William Parente had carried out the murder-suicide of his family on Sunday, as previously described. While the exact timeline remains unclear, the causes of death were identified as asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. Authorities believe Betty and Catherine were the initial victims, followed by Stephanie. One of Parente's last interactions appears to have been with Stephanie's husband, who attempted to contact her by phone around midnight, by which time she had already been harmed. Following this call, Parente is believed to have gone to the bathroom and ended his own life with the knife he had purchased earlier. The horrifying events left investigators struggling to comprehend the unimaginable terror the Parente family endured. William Parente, who left no suicide note, was believed to have killed his family before taking his own life, possibly motivated by mounting suspicion surrounding his involvement in a fraud case. Specifically, Parente was linked to a Ponzi scheme, a deceptive investment plan that paid returns to earlier investors using funds from newer investors, resulting in significant financial losses. Reports suggested the scheme had defrauded investors of approximately $20 million, prompting multiple complaints. One investor reported losing $450,000, while financial investigations revealed that checks totaling $245,000 issued by Parente to investors had bounced, leading to further complaints filed with the New York Attorney General's office. After Parente's death, additional investors came forward, revealing multi-million-dollar losses. As a fellow attorney noted, monetary losses could be recovered, but the irreplaceable loss of lives highlighted the profound tragedy of the situation. Friends and family were left grappling with a mixture of grief and anger. At Loyola College, Stephanie's friends organized a memorial service on Monday night to honor her memory. Meanwhile, the once lively Parente family home became a somber space adorned with flowers and candlelit tributes. Catherine's classmates at Garden City Middle School came together to dedicate a football game in her honor, expressing collective remembrance and solidarity. Within less than a week, Maryland had witnessed two separate familicides. The other involved Christopher Wood from Middletown, occurring on April 16th, just 4 days prior. The close timing and geographic proximity of these tragedies drew significant media attention, prompting discussions on potential links between economic hardship and incidents of familicide and suicide. A funeral service for Betty Parente and her daughters was held at St. Joseph's Church in Garden City. Garden City Life reported that Catherine's middle school classmates were transported by bus to attend, while Stephanie's college peers traveled from Towson, arriving as early as 4 a.m. to participate in the morning ceremony. The family was buried together at St. Charles Cemetery in East Farmingdale, New York, providing a shared final resting place for the mother and her daughters. In contrast, William Parente was given a separate, private funeral service held at a different location. He was cremated, though the precise location of his ashes was not made public. The tragic and harrowing experiences endured by all the victims at the hands of this merciless perpetrator are profoundly distressing. As we contemplate this horrific story, our thoughts remain with the lives that were abruptly taken and with the grieving families and friends left to cope with the immense loss. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.